Hello, folks. How are we all doing? We're coming into the home straight now. So we have a question and answer panel for you. I'm going to take you through some of the events for our fantastic outing into Dublin City tonight before handing over to Anthony, our closing speaker for today. Now, how are the energy levels? I think you're doing that out of fear more than anything else. But you don't need to be afraid. I'm getting nobody on stage. I'm getting nobody to stand up. But I still think it's the hour of the day where a little pick-me-up wouldn't go astray. So this was inspired. I was at my niece's birthday party over the weekend, and I had forgotten how much fun it is to play Pass the Parcel. Are people familiar with the game? Yes. For those of you who might not be, the concept is presents are handed out initially. You don't get to keep them, unfortunately. Music plays, you throw the presents around, and as soon as the music stops, whoever is holding them gets to keep them. Now, we had to pick something that wouldn't give people concussion, so we've gone with some very nice squidgy toys. So can I have the music, please? So start throwing as soon as you catch one. No hanging on to them. Here you go. Oh, somebody's holding on to them. Keep them moving, guys. And cut. Oh. I'm glad we picked soft toys. Some people were startled. I think they got androids on the head. Who wound up with our androids? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Excellent. Round of applause for everyone. Thank you very much. So we're being slightly kinder to you with our energy boosters this afternoon than we were this morning. We are going to have a Q&A panel now, inviting back some familiar faces on stage. So can I invite up one by one, please, if you don't mind, Jamal, and then Guillaume, Sandra, and Nico to join me on stage. Just to give you guys a reminder, Jamal is a UX and analytics consultant. Guillaume is the managing partner of Level Up. Sandra is our director of publisher business solutions, and Nico is with our Google Play team here. Now, there was an ulterior motive to that Energizer, because if I can have my lapel mic turned off for a second, anyone who is in here this afternoon will be familiar with this little guy. His name is Tig, and if you speak into his ear here, everyone will be able to hear you perfectly. He's a microphone. So this is an open Q&A session. Actually, I'll switch back to my lapel mic if you don't mind. This is an open Q&A session. We've been speaking to you for a lot of the day. We'd love to hear from you as part of this. So whatever burning questions you have, we have an eminently qualified panel here to help you answer them. So who would like to ask a question first? I'll let you think about that. I was speaking to some people at the break today, and they asked me to ask some questions on their behalf. So while you're thinking of your questions to ask, I'm going to ask the ones that they have asked me to. So the first question that I got asked by a few people, actually, particularly when they heard who was going to be on the panel, was to discuss what some of the common pitfalls are that developers fall into and how they can be avoided. So I might pose that to yourself first, Nico, if you don't mind.
Sure. Yeah, so I think it's a great question, and sorry for probably repeating what you guys have heard in the different breakout sessions as well, but what I see developers still do, even though it sounds like something that's kind of in the past, is actually develop, and launch, and not test in between. So again, I want to take the opportunity to stress the point that you should develop, test, and iterate continuously throughout the process, and then the launch just becomes another part of that eventually.
I see some nodding beside me here.
Yeah, the most important, so today Steve talked about lots of great ideas, focusing on the user to optimize the conversion rate. My focus here is that we shouldn't too much focus on the conversion rate. We should focus on user experience optimization, UX optimization, because when you focus on the user, the else will follow, conversion rate will follow, and having a testing culture as part of the company DNA is super important, and you can easily do A/B testing on your app with lots of different solutions, including Google Analytics, Experiment, and Tag Manager as well. So I strongly advise you to make this A/B testing culture as part of your company DNA.
Okay, excellent.
Can I?
Please do, absolutely.
Is it like 2 minutes again, or?
No, you will note the absence of any kind of gong on the
Okay.
stage. You can have
Okay.
as long as you like.
So I cannot answer for the technical part of the development and so on, but as an investor, so I've seen maybe, I don't know, 30, 40 games under development over 5-6 years. I've seen one mistake I've seen on some of them. Sometimes you go on in the development and then you lose faith in the game mechanics, for instance. So I saw people starting all very happy and so on, and then stopping after 8 to 9 months, thinking, oh, it doesn't look well, and trying to take the assets again and reshuffle the game with a new game mechanics, forgetting about the meta game and focusing, because they were too stressed, on the kind of early retention, on how can I convince people to play at least a few days, and really forgetting about the meta game, and ended up after 2 years, more or less, a year more than predicted originally, with a game that doesn't work at all because there's no meta game. So for me, it's like sometimes, and it works for not only games but every kind of project, more or less, there's an inspiration when you think about a game as a designer. There's a first inspiration, something you have in your heart, in your gut, that should never be lost, more or less. And if you restart, because if you lose trust, you should start from a white page and forget about the assets as well. It's really difficult for me to see people succeeding in redesigning a game from the beginning. So first thing. Developers, sometimes I saw also people who were too happy about the prototype, too happy about the visuals, the fact that they do 3D games, so that look very, very beautiful at first. In a couple of weeks, you do a prototype in 3D, wow, it looks fantastic. And then they get lost into technology, more or less. So trying to do things with too many gameplays at the same time and so on. So for me, it's like, if you look at, I don't know, a game I played extensively, Heroes Charge, which is a game, an RPG game. I don't know who played it and so on, but I mean, an RPG game with plenty of different loops, all intricated together, but still very, very coherent, more or less. Many people don't know how to do that. Many people actually don't know. The studio who published Heroes Charge actually more or less took a lot from another Chinese studio on that, but so there's a controversy about who did what and so on, but you start with a very simple loop and you complexify progressively, but many developers would end up with a game that is too complex, more or less.
Okay.
So simplicity as well. Yeah.
And maybe just taking it from a slightly different angle. Some mistakes, common mistakes we see pretty often, and especially with new developers, is they're so focused on development and they're so focused on gaining users and engagement, and then they think about monetization. And monetization, you really have to design into your game. So you've got to think about that from the start. So you've got to design natural parts of your game and natural stops in your game or your app where the user's not going to be surprised to see, to be asked to purchase something or to see an ad. So that's the first thing, is think about it when you're designing your game. How could I monetize? Keep your options open. So some common pitfalls we see, for example, in games is that the gameplay is really, 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 really long. So it might take 10 minutes of playing the game before where you can die or where you have to actually click an action. So sometimes there's not a very natural place to put an ad. And if you put an ad that's going to be at a surprising time to the user, our policy team are not going to like that. So you really need to think about this from a design concept from the very, very beginning. And then you also need to think about the format of monetization that you're going to use, it's got to be appropriate. So like a 15-second video is not appropriate every 2 minutes, or if the normal gameplay, especially on a lot of casual games, is, you know, you can die in the first 30 seconds, it's not appropriate to show a video ad that's 15 seconds long if your gameplay is 30 seconds. Or at least it's not appropriate to do it every time. It's only appropriate to do it maybe every 5th time or 10th time. But you really have to take and test whether all of these things and design them from the get-go into your app and your game.
There's some great advice there. I think what I'm taking out of that is it's smart substance over beauty, and if you keep the heart of why you started and test against that constantly, don't get lost in the data, you should be just fine. Any questions from the audience? Yes. I'm sorry, I'm going to go with the person that's easier to throw to here, who's 2 rows in the front. There we go. There you go.
All right. You just talked about appropriate advertising. We talked today about diversification of revenue streams, like in-app purchase or in-app advertising. What do you think about advertising for kids? Like, if your app is targeted for kids like under 10 years old, is it suitable, or like, yeah?
So there's very strict guidelines around that. There's COPPA guidelines around that. So what we recommend is that all developers, first of all, familiarize themselves with those guidelines. And if you're in doubt, you can certainly check with us, and we'll give you some advice as to whether you're within those guidelines. But it's not, again, it's down to the individual app. So some apps are totally used by children by themselves, whereas a lot of apps are actually used with the parent, actually with the child, and the ad is actually directed at the adult. So again, it just depends on the app. It's appropriate in some apps that children use, and it's not appropriate in other apps. But the main advice on that is to stick within the COPPA guidelines.
I would say like 16% of people who play mobile games are under the age of 8. 16%. So you know, there's a large population. 81% of the mothers in the US play games, mobile games, and 2/3 of the time they play with their kids along, which means that out of those 16%, on the top of it, there's also like maybe 30-40% of the people who play with their parents. The problem with an app, an ad, is that most of the time your kid wants to click, right? And he doesn't know actually this little cross on the right-hand side, so he doesn't see it, but he sees this big button here, yellow, that he wants to click. And the button usually leads to whether an app store where it doesn't have the code to download anything, or whether to something that you have to pay immediately, and it doesn't have a credit card. So if it's an ad that ends up with the kid being able to do something with it, that's probably, you know, clever things to do. But if it's an ad directing you to a shop or an app store, then you immediately, you know, the ad won't be efficient anyway, right? So.
Yeah. Thank you.
There is a question just 4 or 5 rows behind you there. I think I'll chime in on that. Having worked with clients for so long, I think it always comes back to Guillaume's point, to relevance. So if you're showing an ad to somebody and you think that the content isn't suitable, then I'd really question, you're going to spend money on it if it clicks, so you don't want to throw bad money after or good money after bad, if that's the case. So I'd always encourage you to think, when you're putting your ads anywhere, when you're monetizing anything, who is that ad going in front of, and is that ad tailored to the eyes that are going to see it? And if it's not, I'd recommend going back to square one again.
Yeah, I mean, we've got very sophisticated monitoring of accidental clicks as well. So if we see accidental clicks which are either, you know, inappropriate, like there's a lot of non-conversions, again, our ads quality team have very sophisticated algorithms for that. So it's not generally recommended if you want to build a long-term business.
Thank you.
This is a question for Guillaume. Which is, do you think the Western world is actually behind China in apps? Like, you'd compare things like WhatsApp to WeChat. The Western had been so focused on just getting investment, get more users, investment, get more users. Surely someone's going to buy us next. While the Chinese have been a lot more cleverer with monetization, take 99 cents, and that we should be actually looking to them, and because we're kind of fell behind, unlike what happened on web, where we're so used to leading the tech stack.
So my wife's Chinese. So I use WeChat all day, right? Yes. The Chinese market is very different. I mean, publishers are much stronger in China. to go towards studios. So the margins are very low for studios compared to what they can be in the West. So it's much tougher actually to be a successful studio in China than it is in in Europe or in the US on mobile. People say so China, there's a volume effect, right? And if you look at the RPPU, Korea is like 4 or 5 times higher than the US. So multiply 4, it's crazy. But China is not at all, and there are many people who complain about the very short life of a game in China, because they push so much on monetization very early on. They don't really care about the quality of the IP long term, more or less. They will launch an additional IP later on, maybe a year later and so on. So they try to monetize as quickly as possible. If you see the successful games in Europe, those IPs usually last at least 4 to 5 years. And if we were to monetize, like push monetization that much in Europe, I'm sure they would not. So I think there's a bit of over monetization of games in China right now, and they have to be careful to keep a good feeling with players as well, not to be too cheating and so on. There's also monetization techniques that are coming from Japan, like the gacha thing and things that have been also very extreme in Asia, that could be illegal in the West. So it's different kind of populations. The Chinese cannot gamble, for instance, so they like to gamble in a game in a way with soft currency, much more than the European would want. You have the Euro Millions here. It doesn't exist in China. So there are plenty of things that are closer to really gaming as the gambling thing that you could have in a Chinese game that actually monetizes very well, but that you won't see in Europe as well. I don't know if that answers your question.
Thank you. There's a lady just behind you who managed to
You don't have the Android.
catch Taig.
Hi, this is another question for Guillaume. When it comes to investing in a burgeoning app, if a founder comes to you and says, what should I focus on first, being profitable or having a monetization strategy, or having an exit strategy, like building the business or creating strategic partnerships that they can say in the pipeline in 4 or 5 years, that is the corporate or that is the business I'm going to be such a thorn in their back that, that's where I'll exit. Do you as investors see that as more attractive than, say, a profitable business after a few years?
Yeah, so I used to invest a lot in technology. In technology, more or less, the cycle is very long. You could invest in a router, piece of networking equipment and so on, and the business cycle will be 7, 8 years old, long, more or less, because you need 2 years to define it, and then you need 2 years to tune it, and then you need 3 to 4 years to sell it. Very long. In a game, it's like 1 year. What we do, there's obviously, those stars like up in the sky, the Supercells, the King, those guys, and obviously nobody will reach that. I mean, very, very few people can reach the scale of a studio that makes 2 million a day or something like that, right? The creative media industry also needs to be fulfilled with average companies, much smaller companies, who can still make a good business out of their games, not really looking for the stars. And what we do, we try to select teams more than games, on the assumption that the first game will always fail anyway. So, people come to you saying their game is going to beat the market, but I usually invest with the assumption that the game actually will fail. And, do I still want to invest if the game fails? And most of the time, yes, because of the quality of the team. So it's about teams that improve game after game, and betting on like a 25% success chance, more or less. And a studio needs to be profitable and break even, and a standalone company without having the obligation to raise every 18 months and so on, and at the cost of being diluted and diluted and diluted again. You should be profitable in 2 years, more or less, 2 to 3 years. So it gives you like 4 or 5 bullets, 4 or 5 chances to make one successful game. A successful game being something like a top 100. If you're a top 100 in grossing, your company, the entire company, will be profitable if you monetize, in the right way. So reaching a top 100 position is much easier than reaching a top 10, of course. It's still difficult, but if you maybe do 2 to 3 projects, maybe you can reach a top 10 position with one of them, and that's good enough. So we're trying to select the best teams, of course, but more or less it's about teams that can learn to be profitable businesses without being the top 10.
It's actually a fantastic point. It brings to life one of the innovation keys, if you remember from earlier on, that Mick Hodgins would have gone through, which is give your teams the freedom to fail.
Yeah.
I think that's probably exactly what you were just referencing there, so it's nice to hear it in action. Thank you very much for your question. I think there was a gentleman right in front of you, which is an easy pass.
Thank you.
For you.
Hi. I'm Paul Guy. I'm the CMO of Reap Rewards. We're a startup app in Ireland. We're around 3 years. We've been using Google basically in the last 6 months, and we got to a point that we felt we've saturated the market in Ireland. So I have 2 questions based on that. The first one is, when do you realise that you've actually saturated the market, that you actually stop spend? And the second question is, we're about to break into the UK in February, and because our app is actually data for businesses, we have a problem because we need to have NatRep, and to get NatRep analysis is very hard to actually realise what brands and what clients are looking for as opposed to what our consumers are looking for. And that's to the panel.
Do you want us to address? We'll address them one by one, I think. So I think the first question out of that was probably, at what point can you tell that a market is saturated, that it might be time to move on?
From a game perspective or app?
No,
do an app, right?
Yeah, it's a game. It's not. Oh, sorry, it's an app. It's not a game.
Okay,
it's a rewarding app. When you snap receipts, you get money back from snapping receipts.
Well, I can speak around app promotion because it's not my specialty. But in terms of promotion, I mean, you're going to, especially if you're setting your campaigns up properly with a data-driven and testing approach, you're going to know, and the Google team working with you will tell you what's a good conversion and what's a good conversion rate, and so we've a lot of data on what is the average price per download, price per download in the market. Yeah. So as soon as you have to start paying more than that, it probably means that the audience is not there. And we do have a lot of tools that will help you find audiences that look like your current audience, so you may be still missing something. So I would suggest that maybe you start there, but if you don't find audience that looks like your current audience, that again, and you're having to pay higher, I think that's probably an indicator that there is no more audience for you to acquire in that market.
So that's the level I'm at now. I'm actually realising that we've saturated the market in Ireland, so hence we should go for the UK.
Yeah. I mean, we do kind of give a lot of advice as well on users who may use your app, who may be interested in other apps. So there may be ways for you to actually diversify in terms of your audience is probably very, very valuable to other app developers as well. So there may be a way for you to actually extend your business to do cross-promotion of your app because your audience is very valuable. You've got a lot of information about your audience. You've got a lot of data. You can segment it. You can test things. There's probably lots of people in the audience today, or we can certainly connect you with other developers who are looking for your audience. So that might be another way for you to extend your business.
Okay, good.
Maybe I can add a comment. Even in the most mature markets, there are huge opportunities to get most out of the existing group of users or consumers, because I want to bring the UX perspective again, like the user-focused perspective again, that Steve mentioned in his talk as well. Do we monetize, or do we get the highest conversion rate that we can get from the existing mature market or user base? So do we, for example, do we know that there are some part of or user segment that cannot convert because of some reasons that you can fix? From my experience, having worked with some major markets and major advertisers as well, I see huge opportunities from the existing user segments that can be solved or that can be utilized by investing more in the user experience, optimizing the user experience, like form optimization or conversion funnel optimization or navigation optimization. So that's another question or advice for you maybe to look into.
Okay, thank you. Okay. And the second part, about going into a greenfield, which is the UK. Sorry, going into greenfield, which is the UK. to get in that rep for your clients. So we have one of the main retailers in Ireland who happens to be in England, and they need to have a national representation of your consumers, your app users, who identify with their brand. And I find that difficult to get that. I'm just wondering, has anyone ever come across that?
Let's take that offline because I actually don't know, but that's something that we can definitely look in and follow up directly with you on.
Okay, thank you.
There is one other question, certainly that I have, that struck me throughout the course of today, because I think one of the major themes that came out was the user. So at every stage, I think every single speaker referenced the user, put the user first, be obsessed with your customer, but also the fact that the future is going to lead to markets. The next billion, they're unlikely to come from markets that we're already familiar with. They're consumers that we already know. So I think my question to the panel would be, in that instance where the next billion might be coming from markets where we're unfamiliar and might not be able to initially put the user first, we can see the opportunity, but how would you advise people to go about seizing it?
So I can quickly answer some aspects of that question. So the next million or billion users can come from the existing population as well. So have you, or did you give the smartphone to your grandfather, grandmother, and let them try the major functionalities? So when it's obvious for us, for example, to double tap to see the zoomed in version of the photo of the product, that's a huge challenge for my grandfather to see a bigger version of the photo, because they don't have that understanding of zooming. They don't know if double tapping activity brings a zoomed version of the image, or similar things. For example, they don't know if a search functionality in your app, for example, is there just to make a search. They don't know what it is used for. This is the reason why the father of UX, Steve Crook, I'm sure you heard about it, wrote a book about don't make the user think. So for the next billion users, they are coming from countries who will first interact with mobile devices, not from desktop. And that's why majority of them will interact with the internet for the first time. So think from their perspective. So lots of things are very obvious for us, but are the features that you are using obvious for them? So in terms of user experience, first of all, and design elements, I advise you to focus on first-time users and to become very obvious for them. Don't make them think. That's maybe the first advice from the UX perspective for the next billion users. Don't make them think.
I would say from a Google perspective, so Google's pretty big, right? I don't know how many people work for Google now, 50,000 plus. But the app developer team inside Google is actually a really small team relative to the size of Google. So it's actually quite easy through your account manager to find the right person in the emerging market or in the market that you're interested in making contacts there. So you can kind of think about the app developer team here in Google as like a really, really, really well-funded startup inside Google. Okay, so we've got a lot of resources, we've got a lot of contacts, and your account management team can help you. We're going to make some introductions in some emerging markets for GM, so we can do that. So, we talk every day to our counterparts in China, in India. We know each other, we work together every single day. So if you want an introduction or you want to find a partner in a market, ask us and we'll help you with that.
Excellent.
I think also from a Google Play point of view on this topic, I think there are a couple of things. First of all, I think it's never been as easy to go in all of these markets. So I think there's a huge opportunity. If you release your app on Google Play, it's very simple to kind of opt into other markets. You have to properly localize what you do. That's a challenge in itself, but if you get that right, then it's very easy to, from wherever you are in the region, to actually go into all of these markets. When you do that, I want to echo a couple of the points. Really think of, from the perspective from the users there. There's very simple stuff like connectivity or the way users buy their data packages and so on that you have to keep in mind. There are markets where people, for example, mainly rely on prepaid. So actually in the description for your app on those markets, you want to ensure them that you're only going to be using their data connection when they know about it, and they're not downloading stuff in the back while they're not using your app, which is maybe common and acceptable for users over here, right? So there are lots of small technicalities which you want to keep in mind. But I think once you tackle them, you actually have great runway through mobile and through platforms like Android, which is particularly strong in penetration in a lot of emerging upcoming markets, to actually grow your business.
Fantastic, thank you. So I think there's some really sound advice in that. Very simple, don't make the user think, which as a user I appreciate. Thank you for stating it. Leverage the networks that are available to you, even if they're not your own, so even if they're Google. And then I think I'm reading from yours, which is make sure that you're being as honest and upfront with the user as possible and address any concerns they may have before they have them, and you might win in that space. I have had a red flashing 0 here for quite some time that I've been ignoring, so we're going to call the panel to a close at that, but I'd like to say a very warm and heartfelt thank you to all of our panelists. Thank you very much.